Hello and welcome to another edition of our dear tier list. We've just finished playing Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. I'd got into a bit of a habit of doing these two at a time, but I think I'd be much happier doing this one by one. If you've not seen one of these videos before, basically this is we're a channel that focuses on RPG design front and reverse design from the Silver Age, predominantly from the Silver Age of computer role playing games. And one of the things that we did very early on in the channel is we arranged things into the tier list that you see before you now. And basically, after we do a let's play of any of the games, be they on the tier list or off it, we then try and pop them in and see where we place them. Helps to give viewers an idea of the sort of RPGs I rate, and but possibly even provide some recommendations as to what the classics, mostly of one specific period, but also you'll see a few entries from that are more modern thrown in as well. But the most recent game that we've covered on the channel is this one, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. So this is recorded the same day as the final episode of that Let's Play, which might impact on my feelings on it. Certain games tend to become more rose tinted. Your view of them becomes more rose tinted, given extra time to think about that, and you end up focusing on the best bits and not necessarily the worst. I'm imagining that Final Fantasy X probably meets that description. But yes, what did we think of Bloodlines? I guess having gone back through this, and one of the themes with all the games as we rank them is what's it like on a second playthrough. Because not all games are second playthrough focused, and nor should they be. Like there's nothing wrong with making an excellent single playthrough game. We talked about, in terms of the JRPGs, Final Fantasy VII and to a slightly lesser extent, but still there, Final Fantasy X are different experiences when played through the second time around, because the events of the game are thrown into a very different context, and a lot of the foreshadowing means that you're talking about things, having an understanding of them that changes the emotional outcome of them. Whereas with something like Final Fantasy IX, that's much less prevalent. Final Fantasy IX is much more about the first playthrough than any subsequent ones. And as I say, that's perfectly valid, but it became quite apparent on the playthrough. I mean, we've covered Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and Fallout 1 and 2 on the channel. We've covered Fire Emblem Three Houses and Knights of the Old Republic on the channel. All of those games were maybe Knights is the one that's perhaps hardest for this, but they were all interesting despite having done it before. It's really only when we get to Final Fantasy IX where it's like that was. And Final Fantasy IX had some really good bits, but it wasn't so good on the second playthrough. I really enjoyed the first half of Bloodlines. I'm not keen on the second half of it. I also think Well, I suppose the caveat that we put in with it is that I did have some things go wrong with the playthrough. We used the unofficial patch, which is really. I'm suspicious of the impact of that. Like stealth in our playthrough was broken, and so it feels a bit harsh to. On one hand, it feels harsh to criticize the primary gameplay loop when something has happened that seems so obviously broken as that. But simultaneously, the base combat just isn't really all that anyway. If we look at in the top 3 tiers, I would say that the only game with I was about to say the only game with worse combat is New Horizons, but that's thinking about like person to person combat rather than ship to ship combat. In terms of ship to ship combat, the ship to ship combat is much better than the fighting combat in Bloodlines. Even something like Arcanum, which has got a lot of problems. Its combat system is buggy, and it hugely heavily favours, whether by accident or design, one class. But Bloodlines is it's not just bad, it's the fact that it kicks up such a fuss about it as well. Like, it wants you to be playing these story missions that have like long combat sections, and it's like, well, maybe your combat should be a bit better than it is. Sorry, just pause there. So I wasn't terribly impressed by that. I really like the it's kind of a trick of Bloodlines that, like, in hindsight, and I'm sure I'll fall into the trap of remembering this fondly once again, but misremembering, is I talked a lot before we went in about the way that it arranges its puzzles, that there's like different ways of solving things, and that there's, like the classic one being the hacking, that you can sort of reverse engineer that, and the idea with the character sheet and leveling up is that you can compensate with attributes for your deficiencies in areas as a player, which I think is a really good setup. I'm not sure that really happens, or it didn't happen in our playthrough, certainly, once we'd left Santa Monica. I think that it's really good, like, in the clinic and things like that. That's really nicely handled. But after that, I think yeah, like many things in Bloodlines, it actually falls off a bit of a cliff. I think similarly, one of the things that Bloodlines, does really well is it's got like a lot of really interesting characters, really interesting and big characters with lots and lots of personality that feel, amongst the characters in the other games in this list, they feel quite unique and they stand out. But again, that to me is very front loaded. But like, if you're going to talk about the characters, I know I go on about Damsel, like, I do love Damsel, but if you're talking about the best characters in Bloodlines and like how big they are compared to the overall plot, that's not quite what I mean. How do I mean to phrase this? I mean, when you're talking about how good the characters are, which characters are like contributing a higher percentage of the quality. Therese and Jeanette are you know, it might be, if we're putting these arbitrary figures on it, it might be as much as 50 or 60%. Like they are such big characters. I don't think there's a character in the game after that gets anywhere close to them. Again, it's in Santa Monica. Even like the sort of like the villainous characters in Santa Monica are more interesting and exciting than a lot of their compatriots in Hollywood or Chinatown, downtown really. Yeah, I think the art design generally in it is fantastic. I do think it's a wonderful implementation of Vampire the Masquerade as a role playing game. Like I think it gets the themes of that down very well. Although I don't like the smorgasbord approach to things from the world. I think it would be better if it spent more time focusing on Ventrue and Gangrel rather than handling Giovanni, followers of Set or whatever the name is, and there's just a whole the Naharaja particularly, like, just it's just like, okay, that feels thematically off. And the other thing with it that, like, I don't think it gets as much as my interpretation of the source books is that it doesn't feel as political as it could be. Like, it doesn't really feel like the factions are interacting with one another. Like, I know that the Anarchs complain about the Camarilla, and the Camarilla mention the Anarchs, and there's reference to these wars with the Kuei-jin, but they don't really. In sort of like in a day-to-day sense, like I don't. LaCroix moves against the Anarchs and what have you, and yeah, you can explain away this and say, oh well, LaCroix is more focused and he's more manipulative, and the Anarchs are just kind of more reactionary. But it just doesn't feel. The amount of times that we went back to the Anarchs, we went and spoke with Damsel because something new had happened. It's just like, just had nothing to say. Bloodlines has got multiple endings, but the endings are not hugely dissimilar, and it depends basically who you side with. But again, you're not given a great a great sense of bonding with the characters that you're siding with. LaCroix obviously is fairly villainous, so you wouldn't generally look to side. It would be weird to side with LaCroix. And I think the game actively steers against you doing that. Similarly, it feels weird to side with Ming Zhao. Like it just feels kind of alien to what you're doing. Um, there's a lot of things that I wish Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines would do that it sort of sets up to do with its what I might loosely call its first act, and then it just sort of seems to peter out as the game goes on, and like just a lot of the level design isn't, to me, um, it's not set up with the player in mind. Like, if we want to talk about like two recent games we've covered, like, and they are chalk and cheese when it comes to their handling of sewers levels. Knights of the Old Republic and Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines. It feels like Knights of the Old Republic. Like they sat down and they really like thought, well, what would the player prefer in these sewers? Whereas in Bloodlines, it's just kind of like there's much more depth put into the design of it, but the design that's put in doesn't feel as player focused. Now, all that said, Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines has got some fantastic characters. It's got a real sense of breadth to its leveling up system. I don't think when you really play it through the second time around, I think you realise that the leveling up system is actually kind of it's less important than it first seems to be, and it's less clever than it seems to be. Um, I don't think it's certainly anything like Fallout One and Fallout Two. Like I think their leveling up systems are way ahead of Bloodlines. But I do like it sort of thematically. I like the way it feels. I really like, and I think it's people will put their thoughts on this. Um, like please put a message in the comments and say like what you think, like, because it's probably a divisive thing, but like I I like how sexually charged it is. I think like at times it's outrageous and like sure like while every time you speak to Damsel, I think you just straight like look down at her tits and then up to her face. But um, yeah, I think that it's like it's definitely got a niche that it's carved out, and it's sitting comfortably in that place. Like one of the worst things I think you can do with things like that is to have like wild lurching tonal shifts. Um, like you don't want to create a game that is quite uh, I'm not sure chaste is the word I'm looking for, but we'll use it. A game that is very chaste and then suddenly out of nowhere something outrageous happens. That has the potential to be creepy. I don't think that Bloodlines is. Um, it doesn't feel creepy to me as a boy. Some of the elements and characters are creepy. Some of the elements characters are horrible. but it doesn't feel like creepy in its relationship between me, the player, and the game. Um, I think that's down to consistency. I'm not sure. Having a look through the list now just to see if there's anything out here that's like I can clearly think of that breaks that. I guess Persona 5's really bad for it. Um, of like what? Sorry, Persona 5. What are you saying about like victims of sexual abuse? I mean, you could write essay after essay on Persona 5. It's an odd experience generally. But I think like the problem with it are the tonal lurches. Um, I think Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines holds that. I think it does well. But it has a lot of problems. So the question is it really, truly, honestly, an A-tier game? It's not going up to S tier, I'll tell you that. I am looking at some of the games in. I, Basically, if I had to play any of these games tomorrow that are in A tier, I mean, obviously I've just played Bloodlines, but like, I think Bloodlines is probably the one of those games that has the most pain points. Possibly Torment. But then with Torment, like the writing is, and I don't mind the writing in Bloodlines. I think it's good, but it's like Torment's just miles above it. Told Planescape. Just have a quick check of the phone because somebody's message. That's fine. I'll do that in a sec. Rather, Bloodlines has felt like a game of soaring highs and crashing lows. And when I think about that, I'm seeing more of the Arcanum, the Final Fantasy X, the Disco Elysium, the Baldur's Gate 3 of this world. Like things it does very well, but also a lot of wasted time in things it does very badly. Indeed, Final Fantasy X, particularly, yeah, I feel like that, and again, putting it between Disco Elysium and that, it's just such a frustrating thing because, like, if I was judging it on Santa Monica, it's like it's here. If it's Santa Monica, and if it's Santa Monica in downtown, it might still be there, or at least there. But it isn't Santa Monica and downtown. It's Santa Monica downtown, Hollywood Chinatown, and then the bloody sewers level. I find it. I find it hard putting it there though. Because a lot of the problems that happened when we've played it didn't happen the first time I played. Whereas if I look at Final Fantasy X or Disco Elysium or Baldur's Gate 3, it wasn't like upon repeated examination I see these problems. It was just like, right, okay, well, second the one, this is a problem. Um, so, was it there? 2 secs. Let me just see the old tier list. Please open on the right screen. It does open on the right screen. Yeah, it's on that. Like, it's just... It's like I say, I want it to be better than perhaps it is. I also think there's a lot of problems with the dialogue. But then... I think it's definitely the worst in this tier if it's there. I'm going to put it in B tier. Am I going to put it in B tier? Am I going to put it in B tier? I can't put it in B tier. It's just the unquantifiable sense of feel. And you know what? If I did have to play it again, like even after all that, even getting through that playthrough, I think I would play it again. It's a real edge case game. I don't think it's as good as Fire Emblem Three Houses. I'm going to go that far because Fire Emblem Three Houses is one we previously ummed and ahed on the AB side. Having gone back through and played that, yeah, and Fire Emblem Three Houses is great. I'm going to leave it in A tier, and that feels like a cop out. It does feel like a cop out. Oh God, I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to put it in B tier. God, this has not been easy. But yeah, right. I'm gonna stick to my guns. I'm gonna go with that. What do you think? Where would you have put Bloodlines compared to this? I'd be really interested to hear your takes. I'm wavering on this, even looking at it. So I think I'm going to abort now. But yeah, tough one. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.